Hello everyone! Some of you might have heard of the academic agent who is a conservative YouTuber. Now I consider this fellow to be a revisionist, revising historical facts to suit his right-wing narrative. So, his idiotic claim about fascism being a form of socialism should not surprise you. Now with that out of the way, let's begin.
Words fascist and Nazi are these days thrown around with reckless abandon. We are told repeatedly that Donald Trump is a proto-fascist. We are told it is fine to punch Nazis in the street, and very often by those on the left or the far left who never give up an opportunity to virtue signal. Of course, they are against fascists because fascists are the ultimate bad guys.
Actually, socialists and communists are opposed to fascists on ideological grounds. Those on the right, on the other hand, have often been close allies with fascists. These rightists include wealthy capitalists, members of the aristocracy, and even right-wing economists.
Let us consider, for example, some statements from the Fascist Manifesto written by Benito Mussolini.
The Fascist Manifesto was not written by Mussolini, but by Alceste de Ambris and Filippo Marinetti, two people who later had a massive falling out with Mussolini. Indeed, Marinetti denounced Mussolini's fascist party as reactionary in the 1920s, whilst de Ambris left the party due to Mussolini's defense of private property. Not only did Mussolini not write the manifesto, the authors who actually did ended up despising him. So this is very poor scholarship from the academic agent. Next, he will be claiming that George III wrote the American Declaration of Independence.
Now, does any of this sound familiar to you? There are a number of features in common with socialism here. It is clear that fascism, like socialism, is opposed to classical liberalism.
Seeing how Mussolini appointed a classical liberal as his finance minister, that view is just plain wrong. Indeed, if you read some of Mussolini's speeches during his time as Duce, you would be shocked at how much he sounds like Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher. In a speech in 1921, Mussolini stated that, "I will give the railways and the telegraphs back to private hands, because the current state of things is outrageous and vulnerable in all its parts. The ethical state is not the monopolistic state, the bureaucratic state, but the one which reduces its functions to what is strictly necessary. We are against the economic state." Thatcher, Reagan and all those classical liberal economists would have been nodding their heads in agreement. No doubt they would have also approved of this speech made by Adolf Hitler in the Reichstag in 1935, where he declared that private property results in higher economic development, whilst communism destroys private initiative and personal responsibility.
The first and most obvious feature is that they favour state control of the economy to the free market. Entrepreneurship and individual free enterprise is banned.
That is simply untrue. Indeed, Christoph and Jonas Scherner completely demolished that myth in their brilliant article, The Role of Private Property in the Nazi Economy, The Case of Industry, where they demonstrate that, despite being in a period of total war, capitalists still retained a great deal of autonomy, just like in other capitalist states such as the US and Great Britain.
In the cases of both fascism and socialism, state ministries rather than the marketplace determine production and supply regardless of the demands. The government also set wages and prices. And so, in virtually all respects, fascism, just like socialism, ran a planned economy based on government calculation and bureaucracy rather than market forces.
Once again, that explanation is quite misleading. During that period, capitalist states were running their economy like Nazi Germany. Why? Because a total war was going on. Indeed, Britain and the US adopted a total war economy before Nazi Germany did. Furthermore, Nazi officials such as Goebbels made it quite clear that such total war measures would only be temporary.
Im Osten wird ein ganzes Volk zum Kampfe gezwungen. Hier werden Männer, Frauen, ja Kinder nicht nur in die Rüstungsfabriken, sondern auch in den Krieg getrieben. 200 Millionen stehen uns hier teils unter dem Terror der GPU, teils befangen in einer teuflischen Anschauung mit wilder Stumpfheit gegenüber. Die Massen von Panzer, die in diesem Winter unsere östliche Front berennen, sind das Ergebnis eines 25-jährigen sozialen Unglücks und Elends des bolschewistischen Volkes. Dagegen müssen wir mit entsprechenden Gegenmaßnahmen antreten, wenn wir das Spiel nicht als verloren aufgeben wollen. Ich gebe hier meiner festen Überzeugung Ausdruck, dass wir die bolschewistische Gefahr auf die Dauer nur niederringen können, wenn wir ihr, wenn auch nicht mit gleichen, so doch mit gleichwertigen Methoden entgegentreten.
Now, there are some superficial differences here. For example, under socialism, the workers own the means of production, which basically means that the government owns and runs industry. Under fascism, in the stricter sense, as I'm sure you're aware if you've ever seen Schindler's List, individual businessmen retained ownership of their factories, but all of their operations were pressed in the national interest.
Hardly a surprise, since they were preparing for or fighting a total war at the time.
The state should retain supervision, and each property owner should consider himself appointed by the state. It is his duty not to use his property against the interests of others among his own people. This is the crucial matter. The Third Reich will always retain its right to control the owners of property. So basically, factory owners had to do whatever the government told them to do. Here, the nominal difference between private and public ownership is basically meaningless.
Actually, there are many examples where private industry refused to follow the directions of the state, even when the projects were extremely important to the government.
Some Marxists might insist that the fact that Oskar Schindler owned the factory rather than the Third Reich means that the workers were still being oppressed by the privileged bourgeoisie, but I'll leave it to you to deal with that objection.
Well, that fact was already confirmed at Nuremberg in 1946.
Among the German manufacturers accused of using slave labor for arms production was industrial giant Krupp. Gustav Krupp had been a loyal Nazi. He helped fund Hitler's rise to power. He gave signed copies of Hitler's book Mein Kampf to his German workers. And Hitler reserved a special place for Krupp and his employees at the Nuremberg rallies. Alfred Krupp and 10 of his fellow directors were convicted at Nuremberg. The company's assets were seized.
The second common feature is that both fascists and socialists strive for self-sufficiency, that is, in relying on native production rather than foreign imports for all goods.
Well, it's pretty obvious why Germany and Italy strove for autarky during that period. I will let Mussolini explain it.
Autarky. Ohne wirtschaftliche Unabhängigkeit ist die politische Unabhängigkeit einer Nation selbst in Frage gestellt und ein Volk von großer militärischer Kraft kann zum Opfer einer wirtschaftlichen Blockade werden.
Well, that was simple. You should remember that Germany's defeat in the First World War was largely due to the British blockade.
A third common feature is the brutal suppression of individual rights for the collective good. Consider this from Mussolini. The citizen in the fascist state is no longer a selfish individual who has the antisocial rights of rebelling against any law of the collectivity.
Let's stop right there. No country allows any individual to rebel against the laws of the state. Just look at how Thatcher dealt with the miners' strike.
And interprets for them the duties they have to fulfill. Note the strong emphasis on collectivity and cooperation for the common good.
Class collaboration is a rightist talking point, not a leftist one. Indeed, socialists tend to talk about liberating the working class from the capitalist oppressors. Fascists and conservatives, however, think that the working class should cooperate with their employer or suffer the consequences.
Die unersetzbar der Erfinder und der wirkliche Wirtschaftsführer sind. Dass in einer Sphäre solche Auffassungen weder Streiks noch Aussperrungen geduldet werden können, ist klar. Der nationalsozialistische Staat kennt kein wirtschaftliches Hausrecht. Über den Interessen aller Kontrahenten steht das Gesamtinteresse der Nation, das heißt unseres Volkes.
So basically, fascists support the capitalist form of hierarchy and will eliminate those who seek to complain about it. This is utterly moronic. Great Marxist thinkers like Rosa Luxemburg were totally opposed to a formation of a secret police, as they were opposed to imperialism in general. Also, it should be a known fact that right-wing movements that are determined to defend their capitalist allies are more likely to create these repressive organizations. Indeed, the British Empire, Tsarist Russia, and the US all had such organizations before the 1917 October Revolution. What is more significant is that right-wing dictators such as Pinochet, Franco and George Videla were more likely to create such organizations in countries that had previously been free democracies.
They are both utopian visions. And as we have seen, specifically utopian visions developed to fix the perceived inequalities and problems created by laissez-faire classical liberalism.
This is hilarious. Why? Because laissez-faire classical liberalism is the ultimate utopian fantasy as we have seen throughout history. Indeed, laissez-faire capitalism should be regarded as an oxymoron. Why? Because private property can only be protected by the state. History has shown that, so to say that it can operate without state interference of any kind is a utopian fantasy.
One, socialism is international, and fascism is ethno-nationalistic. So socialism has tended to be a brotherhood of man made up of comrades of the world. In contrast to this, fascism is nationalistic, often with an ethnic dimension.
That is largely correct, so let's move on.
But, as we have seen, for all practical purposes, there is very little difference in domestic or foreign economic policies or in their view of the individual.
Complete nonsense. Both Hitler and Mussolini had a positive view of private enterprise and entrepreneurship, as I have shown throughout this video. Nazi ideology held entrepreneurship in high regard. Private property was considered a precondition to developing the creativity of members of the German race in the best interest of the people. Therefore, as shown throughout my video, fascists tended to be pro-capitalists, while socialists are well known to be anti-capitalist. True, that is a difference, but wouldn't that make the fascist states more like the capitalist imperialist powers such as Britain and the US? Belief in their own racial superiority was no doubt a factor in the drive to the west in the United States and the British conquest of India.
In other words, Stalin opposed Hitler because Hitler wanted to take Stalin's land. So now we've come to the end of all this, I ask you, viewer, is fascism a form of socialism? Do the differences outweigh the similarities sufficiently for us to make them two different categories, or are they actually variants of the same thing? You tell me.
I know I'm repeating myself here, but it is clear that one of the primary differences between socialism and fascism is that fascism is pro-capitalist, while socialism is anti-capitalist. Since socialism is primarily an economic system, this distinction is by far the most important.